Let's go ahead and get started with today's webinar on simplifying SharePoint with K2 forms. Just a quick agenda. Some of the things we'll talk through today, some SharePoint challenges, SharePoint as it is today, whether that be the 2010 environment or further beyond that, SharePoint 2013, as well as previous versions, 2007 and WSS. We'll talk about a little bit of introduction into K2, some of the key features of K2, types of workflows that we see and can fit within that SharePoint environment, as well as a quick demonstration and, of course, that questions at the end of the session. Again, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to type those in. All right, so let's kind of talk a little bit about SharePoint and just kind of do a little level setting and kind of see all the things that come with SharePoint typically, being able to do things like content management, have that collaboration, that nice portal collaboration for everyone to be involved in. And typically when people have SharePoint, they're able to use all the functionality of it. And what we want to do is see how we can use K2 to simplify what you can do and really exploit some of the powerful capabilities within SharePoint. And as you can see, there's quite a lot involved in SharePoint, and we just kind of want to make that a little bit more exploited as far as the features set within SharePoint. And typically, we want to be able to obviously solve our business problems using that SharePoint environment and really leveraging that investment. So taking those SharePoint features and functions, wrapping them into solutions to solve business applications and business problems. And again, this is from within the 2010 environment even to 2013. And I'm not going to be version specific. The demonstration I'll show today is focused on 2010. But again, if you have any questions, we can surely answer those. All right, so let's talk a little bit about workflow and forms as it exists, at least in the SharePoint environment. So, and why we want to use workflow and forms. So workflow obviously is a great way to simplify that user interaction and kind of automate tasks that are repetitive. Being able to provide consistency, and anytime you involve people, you want to be able to have an audit of what's occurring, reporting on that, visibility into those processes. And then, of course, anytime you involve people, those people typically need a form to enter the information, make the appropriate decisions, see information that might come from other systems. And so forms are really that natural extension of workflow, providing that user interface for those users and obviously giving them the information they need to guide them in their decision process. So really, workflow plus forms creates that business application. That's kind of what we're going to focus around in the K2 realm, is creating business applications around that SharePoint environment. So SharePoint forms, typically what we use today are InfoPath or form services, thick client designs, some line of business integration, and some of the forms we use today specifically around InfoPath, especially going into 2013, there hasn't really been any new functionality or scenarios introduced with the 2013 environment. So again, and even the use of it is obviously something that's to be desired for and trying to access that. So there's a couple of blogs out there that kind of talk about how the use of InfoPath and even in the 2013 environment is a little bit tricky, I would say. So again, SharePoint workflow, SharePoint forms. In the workflow scenario, you have typically list-based or site-based forms tightly coupled with those SharePoint objects. In 2013 or 2010, we've done a little bit better with that, being able to, or SharePoint's done better with that to decouple that. But you still have some constraints in the types of workflow and even in the type of line of business that you can expose into those workflows. I had a question yesterday from a customer asking about, K2 and its capabilities and not being able to be completely scoped to those SharePoint lists and libraries and even sites and farms. And so one of the areas to focus on or to think about is when you're building workflows and you want to reuse those workflows across different sites and workspaces, to be able to have that capability. And sometimes that's a little bit of an issue within the SharePoint environment itself. So what you typically have is the ability to use the SharePoint environment, list, document libraries, content types, all those bubble things that we saw on the first slide. And even with the introduction of 2013, you now have a new workflow manager. So kind of taking those workflows and introducing a little bit of complexity within that environment. So I just kind of want to transition over to K2 now. So we talked about SharePoint, and now we want to try to simplify some of those things that we saw from workflow and forms. Now, from a K2 perspective, just a really quick introduction. We've been around since about 2000. We have over 200 employees worldwide. We are a global company with offices and distributors across the globe. And we also, some of our success or most of our success is based on our customers and the success of our own customers. We do have over 2,500 customers, 1 million users using the software itself, again, across the globe in 40 countries. And 15% of those are Fortune 100 companies. So we've been around, we do scale, and we are a global company that allows you to build these workflows and business applications specifically. And K2 is really that platform, a platform for building business applications. But today, again, I'm going to focus specifically around that SharePoint environment and specifically around workflows and forms because we want to simplify what we've got in that investment with SharePoint. So we typically see 3 levels of workflow and different types of workflow. One might be at the most basic level an item-centric. So we do document routing, item routing, so lists and documents, some simple forms, maybe using the SharePoint list forms, and simple line of business integration. So again, just taking a simple process, attaching it to a workflow, and doing some approvals. And some, as an example, an expense claim scenario. So we have our very basic form where we see who submitted the options or the document, as well as some of the criteria for that, and then the appropriate tasks: approve, inquire, or reject. But what we typically do find is we need additional information to make that decision. So yes, we've got our expense claim, but there might be some other information we need. So what's the employee's department, who's their manager, the estimated size of the deal they're working on for this expense. So there's a number of additional components that come into play when we're making these decisions, even if it is that simple expense claim, just approving the expense or not. You typically have other areas that you want to look through to make sure that this expense claim is appropriate. So if we go back to that main site of the workflow applications, there's also a second level, so more form centric. So we've moved from beyond the simple form just giving us our simple information. Now we want to expose additional information. So we want forms that actually receive information from our line of business and even update those information. So some integration, maybe a little bit of reporting beyond that, decisions that are actionable depending on some of the information on our forms. So if we take a look at an example of that real quickly, let me just get my mouse to point here. There we go. So we've got maybe a sales order approval. So we have the sales information, we have the associated document. So we've got information relative to the task, but again, we typically find ourselves needing a little bit more information that we'd like to expose on this form. Who's the sales rep? Who's the customer? What region are they in? What are the additional customers in that region? Are they being overtasked? Do they have outstanding payments for that customer? Maybe we want to see the order detail list of some items on that account. So again, decisions don't come from multiple areas and multiple line of business systems to feed into that decision, and being able to see that all in one place is really what K2 is trying to accommodate here. So again, we have that simple form, but we want to expose different information to make a proper decision. And then the third area is business critical. So we've combined the item centric with forms, and now we want to make that business application. So not only are we tying forms and data together, but we have core processes that run our applications, extensive line of business information, rich integration needs. So I want to update, read information. Again, that, of course, the visibility and auditability, maybe seeing who's tasked to different tasks, doing some kind of round-robin task allocation, and of course business insight, maybe drilling down into each one of these processes to get more information from those specific tasks. And so those are really the levels of workflow that we see when building workflows, whether it's within or without SharePoint. And so the 4 pillars of K2, and just kind of a little bit of a K2 introduction, are the workflow, forms, reports, and data. And so these are the 4 pieces that help us build applications and business processes, whether it's that item-centric all the way to the other end of business-critical workflows. So if you kind of drill into each one of those, and I'm not going to talk entirely about each specific item, but from a workflow perspective, and what K2 offers is the ability to create those workflows, have that version control. So if I have in-flight processes, I want to create another version, I don't have to migrate my other processes. K2 will handle that completion. A task assignment, I mentioned quickly about a round robin or some other simple or complex task allocation. Integration with line of business systems, task management, And from a design perspective, K2 does offer 4 different designers. So again, making it easier for the users that are building these workflows. Typically, if you're using that SharePoint environment, you're either using possibly the Visio design experience and then taking that into SharePoint Designer. And then SharePoint Designer, if it's line of business integrations or more complex scenarios, you take that into Visual Studio. So with K2, you have a number of designers, but they're all very visual and graphical. And the reason for the different designers is really based on your skill set. So if you're comfortable in the SharePoint environment, you can build the same workflow that you would build inside of another environment. So it's based on what your comfort level is in building these workflows and also in a no-code experience. Obviously, we do have a Visual Studio environment as well for those users that are very technical that like to stay inside that Visual Studio environment that may actually need to write code for those reasons and stay in that environment. But again, each one of the K2 integration pieces specifically around SharePoint are known code and drag and drop kind of design experiences. Now from a forms perspective, and again, I'm just going to expand out my slide here, we've got a number of options. And again, the concept around K2 is making it easier to build these applications and build them quickly and efficiently for users that aren't necessarily technical. And that's where the K2 SmartForms comes into play, is building really robust forms, integrating with line of business systems without having to write code. Has full version controls, standard controls like date controls, input controls, as well as the ability to extend those to even more custom controls if necessary. And also being able to reuse different sections, so views. And in this next slide, we'll kind of see that. The ability to create composite forms that tie to multiple systems, so integration. So being able to make those informed decisions with information coming from a line of business systems. In this example, I have a K2 form. It's got a couple of tabs. You can do some nice tabs on your forms. And inside each one of these sections, these reusable components, and again, I can reuse each one of these sections in another form if necessary. But you can see it's receiving information, integrating with CRM, SAP, SharePoint information. So I can make that informed decision without having to go into a separate SharePoint library to swivel over to my SAP environment or even my CRM environment. I can see all that information captured in one form. And again, think about those different workflow types: item-centric, document-centric, business-critical. Which area would this fit in for you? And then we've got data. So I talk a little bit about integration and how we actually do that. And K2 doesn't actually cache or store any of that data inside of the workflow itself. That data stays where it belongs, which is that line of business system. And K2 gives you the ability to integrate with those systems without writing code, which allows you to use that information inside of your reports, inside of your forms, inside of your workflows. So you can see how the reusability of the platform. So not only from the workflow of designing and creating these pretty boxes and lines, but being able to integrate and reuse that capability across your platform or across your business application. And then we also have reporting. So we want to be able to have visibility, full visibility in the process, from when a user is actioned or assigned a task to when they picked up that task, what action they took on that task, and how long from start to finish did that task take. So you have full insight into user performance, process performance. You can even extend the information or the data being captured by K2 into things like Power Pivot for Excel that allows you to do drill downs into, so you can drill down into some of the data being captured and actually create a nice, robust reporting facility. So again, that full platform with all 4 of those pillars: workflow, forms, reports, and data, allowing you to simplify that SharePoint integration and really leverage and bring to life that SharePoint integration. And so if we kind of talk back and go back around to the SharePoint environment, you've got the same list: document libraries, content types, that robust environment, collaboration. And now what you're doing is putting business apps. So, and that's where K2 comes into play. Being able to leverage that investment, use the power of SharePoint, but exploit those assets in SharePoint to business critical applications, simple forms, document-centric applications, etc. So if you want to hear some of our customer stories and see what's going on and what customers are using K2 with and how they're using it in relation to SharePoint, you can visit our website. We have a link that tells about customer stories. You can see some videos, read about what they've done as well. Just again, kind of just quickly showing you a little bit of what's been done around K2 from some of our customers. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into the demonstration. So we talked about some of the challenges within SharePoint. We've seen and discuss some of the capabilities and the pillars of K2. Now let's go ahead and take a look at an example of some processes and how we can actually build those within the SharePoint environment. So I'm going to just go into my design experience here, or my portal site here. And what we're going to see is a couple of things. I've taken this example and using SharePoint 2010, and again, it's not any version specific. You can do the same thing inside of a 2013 environment. But what I'd like to show is a number of components from the K2 perspective inside of SharePoint. We'll talk a little bit more about the work list as soon as I action a task. I'm going to run through a quick end user experience, and then we'll walk through a design of that experience. So, and the work list itself shows tasks that have been assigned to you, and you can see I've involved a number of tasks, and those are all given to me in one place. I don't have to search my emails or search different SharePoint lists and libraries for the information. And I've also got, I'm going to focus on my operations department here. And I want to do a change request. And so my change request as it sits today is inside of a Word document. So I'm actually going to expose that Word document inside of SharePoint in a form kind of matter. So I'm not going to use an info path form. And in this experience, I'm going to use the SharePoint list form and a Word document. In my next experience, I'll show you how we can add K2 SmartForms on top of that. So a number of things before I do get started. I have a list here with request types, so I can see the type of request, what system, and who the approver is. So you can see the dynamic ability here already. So K2 is going to query my line of business, in this case SharePoint, to determine my approvers. I've also got some department approvers. I'm also going to use Active Directory in this case as well. So to get started, I'm just going to kind of quickly pop into my change request library, my document library. You can see I've got a number of change requests, either in progress or already completed, and they're filtered by normal or emergency type of processes. So I'm going to go into my library settings and into my K2 workflow. And here I'm actually going to see the actual design experience. So we're going to just kind of take a quick look at the design experience, and then we're going to jump into an end user experience and watch this run. So I'm going to open up my process that I've already got created. And again, I'm staying within the SharePoint environment. So everything that I'm seeing or that you're doing is the K2 design experience within SharePoint. This design experience will be the same experience you'll see inside of SharePoint 2013. Of course, how you get to it is a little bit different based on the SharePoint 2013 changes and visibility or UI changes. So here I've got my design experience. I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to update my document library. I'm going to set the change request number, and then I'm going to route depending on if it was an emergency or a normal type of application, a change request. So let's kind of put this on hold for a moment and see this in action real quickly. So I'm just going to minimize my screen here, and I'm going to open up my browser real quickly. Just open it up as Chad in this case. A little shortcut here. So Chad is in his portal site, and again we're going to go into the operations, and I'm going to update or create a new change request. Now as I upload that change request, let's take a quick peek into the document that we're going to upload. And again, this is just a very basic Word document. It's my change request form. You can see I have a spot for my change request control number. I can now select using my standard Word controls. I'm choosing it's an application type. You can kind of start getting and tying together what I'm about to do in my process, the location, who the requester is. Here's my condition, is it normal or emergency? So K2 is actually going to read this information from my Word document and retrieve that information, update my document library, and route based on different elements that we retrieved from this document. In addition to those fields that allow me to route and make this a little bit more efficient, is again just some content related to this document, as well as placeholders that I have toward the end here that allow comments and signature and date. So as each user actions this task, K2 is going to update the document for me. So at the end of the day, after all the approvals are done, I'm going to have a Word document that I can convert into a PDF if necessary. And I have a full audit of what happened in the process. K2 is updating the document. The actual users are not updating the document itself. So you have some consistency with how this is running. So let's go ahead and create a new document. And again, you can add a new document by uploading, or you can create a new document just setting the content type for that type of document. In this case, I'm just going to go and browse for my document. I'm going to go into my environment here. Let me just go ahead and find that real quickly. And I want my K2 assets and my change request, and I've got my compatibility upgrade. So let's go ahead and upload that. So as I upload this, and again, you can create a new document with the content type to accomplish the same functionality. In my case, I just browsed. So you can see that that document has been added to the document library. And so at this moment, K2 is actually reading into that document, pulling back the information from that document, and will populate my document library. So let's just do a quick refresh of that change request. You can see now we've got a normal, so it actually got pushed into normal. Here's our compatibility upgrade, and the fields that were actually in that document have now been placed inside of the document library. So again, something very simple as a change request or a Word document that we're all familiar with, we all fill them out, upload it into SharePoint, and now K2 leveraging SharePoint can use the two together and now start doing a nice task, an automated task for us. So I don't have to send via email this document to anybody. I don't have to send the link to anybody. K2 is now taking care of that for us. So let's kind of take a look at the task itself. So my first step was obviously to upload the document. So I'm creating my request. And as my first user, and I have some shortcuts here, I have a couple of users that are going to proceed in this application here. So I remember I used the application, so Barry is going to be my approver. And if you recall when we were in our list, if I just go back to my list real quickly, my list for my operations department actually showed me who my request types or who it actually goes to. So just quickly going into my request type, application went to Barry. So again, K2 dynamically queried that line of business system to find out who the task should be sent to. So again, I didn't have to hard code that. I'm querying, and again, you can query SharePoint list, you can query a line of business system to determine who those are. So the first thing I want to do is show you one of the quick reporting features. So the view flow. This allows us to really take a good look and a snapshot of where we are in the process. And this is a live view of that process. And you can see I've got my tasks. I've got that change request number that is already updated in my document. I've also got the ability to route tasks to 3 simultaneous users, so my system owner, which is where we're at now, my IT approver, as well as my QA analyst. I can click into each one of these items and take a look at some of the information being captured by K2, including when they started the task and how long it's going to take them to complete that task. So again, I have the ability to drill into these and get some metrics around it as an end user, so I can get a nice look at that process, see why it landed in my lap, or if I'm waiting for somebody to complete a step in their task. So again, that K2 work list gives us access to our tasks. Again, I can also send an email to somebody and they can approve the task directly from their Exchange mailbox by typing in approve, deny, or whatever the actions are. You can action the task directly from the task itself. You can set things like out of the office. So again, extending that SharePoint environment, allowing you to action the task, staying within that SharePoint environment. So let's go ahead and open up our task. And here you can see I'm using just a very simple SharePoint list form. So I'm not incorporating the K2 forms yet, but again, I was able to generate a form very quickly with K2 that's very SharePoint centric, allowing me to see information that was retrieved from the document. And now I can add some comments. So in this case, I'm just going to copy some of this content here and just going to paste it in, because we're going to see this actually get updated for Barry in that document with the date timestamp. So their signature is getting approved. K2's handling that, again, that auditability. Now we can approve or decline. We can also open up that document directly as well. So here I'm just going to go ahead and submit this task as approve. So we've got our task approved. I'm no longer needing Barry, so I'm going to close his browser down. And you can see as I close that browser down, we've got that task completed for our system owner. But you'll also notice that I'm not going into the next step, my merge step, until my other 2 users finish their task. So again, I'm able to control how my task is being routed based on which users are responding. I can also set it so that maybe I only need to wait for my system owner and IT. In this case, I'm going to wait for all 3 users. So let's go ahead and go into the next user real quickly. QA here, and just action their task. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the work list. In this case, I just want to open up my task. I want to action my task out. But in this case, one of the things I want to look at real quickly is this change request document. So let's go ahead and take a look at that document. It's in flight, it's in progress. We want to take a look at that document. You can see it's got SharePoint wrapped around it saying it's part of a document library. But one thing to note here, first is we've got the change control number. So nobody entered that. It was K2 entering that as part of the process, and that was one of the first steps we did. The next thing we see is the comments. So you can see those comments that I copied in for that system owner are placed in place as well. So K2 is managing this document for us, and again, it's leveraging SharePoint around that process. So let's go ahead and action this task. We've got it set to approve, and action that task. And I forgot to put any comments in, but that's okay. We'll actually add comments from our next user. So we can go close that tab, and of course we should see that change again and not continue to the next step until IT approves. So as K2 is running through that, I'm going to go ahead and open up Sean, my IT user. We'll go ahead and open up our task. And now I'm going to enter some comments, and again I'm just going to do a little quick copy. Enter some comments for the IT user and submit. So again, we've got approved. So what we should see now is us finishing the task off. And again, every one of these users can open up their Word document or their Exchange mailbox, open up the task, reply to that task inside of Exchange, and continue forward. So here we've done our last user approval, IT, and now we should see it change to complete the rest of our process. Now, as part of this process, I also have a sub-process. So my update document, I actually call a sub-process. That actually creates the document and finishes updating all the pieces that are relevant for this particular asset. So my update document, I can go into my parent process as well. And again, think about this in a way, and this is one of the questions I had yesterday that was really about SharePoint and going against or leveraging K2 to meet some of the limitations that come with SharePoint. And one of those was they have a SharePoint library and they'd like to be able to reuse components and reuse it regardless of what SharePoint library it is, regardless of what SharePoint site it's on. They want to be able to reuse that. So being able to create a function, if you will, or a separation of pieces that don't really apply to any specific library but can be used across libraries. And that's kind of where we see this parent-child piece. Now I do see I have a question out there. If you want to go ahead and type that question in, I'll be able to answer that and see if we can get to that question if it relates to this discussion as we're talking now. So as we can see, the green lines mean the path that was taken, red is the path that wasn't taken, and we've finished our process. So at the end of the day, what we want to see is that completed document. And again, I'm just going to go into my portal site here. I should have it open already. Let's go into our portal site here, back into our change request library, and kind of see what was created at the end result with K2. So I'm going into my change requests, and we should see it in completed status or getting to completed status. So it is completed. Let's go ahead and open up that document and see what was added by K2. So again, none of my users had to actually make a change to the document. They didn't have to type their comments. They simply typed it in. And again, you can do it inside of your mobile application if in your form that has comment sections. We've got our change control number, as well as each of our comments for our different users with the date timestamp. So our system owner, Barry, there's the date and time, and again, you can format these as necessary. We've got our IT user, Sean, with the date timestamp, and we didn't have any comments for our IT user, but we did date timestamp that. So another thing you can do is also add, well, what action did they take? Maybe it's important for you to know that they said approved or they hit decline, whatever that action might be. Maybe it's important to show that in the document itself. So again, being able to receive that information from our Word document. Now I did have a question out there that said, can the change order Word document receive or display rich text formatting from the SharePoint library? Absolutely. So it's not just one direction. We're actually using information, whether it's be inside of the SharePoint document libraries, whether it be from a line of business system, whether it be entered in the form. We can take that information and push it back into the Word document, and vice versa. As I showed, we can retrieve information from that Word document and push it into SharePoint, and even push it into a line of business system. So maybe it's a combination of SharePoint and another line of business system. again, falling more toward that business critical applications from the different types of workflow. So good question. Hopefully that answered and cleared it up for you. All right, so okay, again, it was nice to see the application and see it running, but let's kind of take a look now at how we actually design that. Let's look at some of the features in there. So back in our design experience, my change request, my K2 for SharePoint, so this is the K2 designer within SharePoint. As you can see, it's very graphical. I don't have to go into another design experience. This is the design experience I can stay in. If you're using Visio with SharePoint, typically you'll notice you can design it out graphically, but then you have to take it into SharePoint Designer and actually configure it. Here we're able to configure it directly in the experience. So let's kind of take a look at some of the things we did first. I'm going to go ahead and just double click my update status because I want to show you what this application or this step actually does. So I'm just going to open that up real quickly. You can see it's very wizard based, and all the design experiences, whether it's in Visual Studio, the web-based designer, etc., is all graphical, all wizard-based. So here I'm setting up the ability to retrieve the Word content and pull it into my document library. So here's my document library fields on the left, and here's the action I'm taking. In this case, I'm getting the Word content. Now, typically you would have to write code to do this, but K2 makes it easy for you. K2 gives you something called inline functions, and so here are some out-of-the-box that come with the software directly. Ability to access Word content, ability to access or integrate with Excel, some math functions like performing average calculations. Again, typically things you would have your IT developers build and write code for. We've now made it graphical for you. So if I just drag and drop that onto the canvas, get Word content, you can see it pops up a nice wizard for me. The nice thing for those of you that are technical that might want to extend these, you have the ability to create your own inline functions and make them graphical as well inside of the designers. For example, if you have a very custom and very complex way of determining how users are given their tasks, maybe it's by region and their last name because it's sorted from A through B and Z through or W through Z. So depending on that scenario, you can create or use your existing code that you've already created, expose that to the design experiences in SharePoint and within K2 and expose that as a wizard. So here in this case, it's asking me for the location, and because I'm in a document library, I have access to the document content, including the actual URL, the document name, etc. And now I just need to tell it which control in that Word document. Again, it's just a simple Word document, but it's got controls in it that allow K2 to interact with it. So I'm passing that value in as well. So again, I can now store that inside of the system, so I know what system, what condition, emergency or normal, and then I can even use things like a now, a date time function. So again, inline functions for date and time that allow me to grab the current date and time. So again, I can add days, I can get the current date and time, drag that onto the canvas, and K2 will timestamp that for me. So that was our very first step, and that's when we saw the document uploaded. Initially, we didn't have any document library settings updated, and then the first step, that's where we retrieve the information from SharePoint. The next step is we wanted to create a change request number. So again, I'm just going to open up this task, walk through my little wizard, and actually I created my change request by creating a random number. So I didn't have to call IT and say, hey, I need to figure out how to write a random number. I just used my inline functions, threw it into the canvas, it popped up and said, well, here's your random number, give me the minimum value and the maximum value, and I'll give you something in between that. It's just random number. Sometimes you might already have change request numbers and you want them to be in sequence. I've typically seen that where we query a SharePoint list or a SQL database that has the last change request number and we add one to it. And again, using the inline functions, you can do that. So again, now we've got our change request number. But one thing I did want to show real quickly, we routed based on emergency and normal. So there's a rule behind these lines, and I'm just going to go ahead and edit. And so we're actually taking the condition that we pulled from our Word document, and we're seeing if it's equal to, greater than, etc., to our value of emergency. And so maybe you have different types and you want to make it even more dynamic. You can have a SharePoint list that has the values of emergency, normal, potentially conditional, whatever those cases might be, and you can drag and drop, so you don't have to hard code that value in. You can actually drag and drop it using your SharePoint columns. So again, being able to retrieve other list items as part of your workflow to make those decisions. All right, so that's how we kind of created those pieces. Let's look at some routing and how we sent tasks to different users. We've got our IT head approval. And actually I'm using Active Directory, and I'm just going to click on the approver, the participants. I'm actually querying Active Directory and passing in values. So I want to go to Active Directory and I want to get the operations department, and I want to make sure that the person's title says manager. So let's go ahead and show you how I did that. I'm just going to drag another option in here, put my manager, because I want to delete this group here. And I'm just going to throw that in the trash. And so I'm going to recreate that step. So I want to send it to my manager of my IT department or my operations department. And so to do that, we use what we call smart objects. Remember those pillars, the 4 pillars of K2, one of them was data, and data in our case is what we call smart objects that allow us to extend into our SharePoint list items, SharePoint or Active Directory, those line of business systems. So here I've got my employee. I want to get my employees, and I want to get the employee name. So I'm going to scroll down, look for my name, and this is actually the content from my line of business system, in my case Active Directory, that I'm retrieving this from. So I'm going to drag that onto the canvas, and you can see it pops up and it says, well, I'm going to give you all the Active Directory users, but do you want to filter them? So you can pass in some parameters if necessary, or you can apply a filter. In my case, I want to make sure that the department, so I'm just going to scroll down to my department. So my department equals to or even contains the word. So my department is operations. And I also want another criteria that says and, so it's got to be the Department of Operations, and their title. Let's scroll down for my title there. And their title, and again, it could be assistant manager, project manager, whatever that might be. In my case, I just want it to be a full manager, so I'm just going to say manager. So if the department equals operations and their title is manager from Active Directory, then that's who I want to send the task to. Now there could be multiple managers, so we can return the first one or we can return them all. So I might send this task to multiple users. And again, you can see the dynamic ability of actioning tasks, and it's really simplifying that SharePoint environment. Yes, we're creating a workflow. Yes, it's a simple workflow, but sometimes the way we actually have to action tasks and send tasks aren't always that simple. You want to send tasks to Active Directory. How do we actually get Active Directory users and be able to filter that information by the criteria for our application here? So again, being able to do that within this drag and drop action motion here. I can notify my participants by email as well. If I hit next here, I can customize my message, and what we'll see is the ability to send a user a task. So K2's already filled out some of the pieces for us, but it's also showing us that we can send a task that shows them what action they can take. So this allows you to reply to the email to action the task. So K2's giving you that ability in what we call smart actions, so you can action that task directly. So I'll just give it a quick subject and hit finish. So again, we've just modified our IT head approval. We added a manager approval as well as one-to-many IT managers. So again, being able to do that, and also sending to system owners based on the Word document itself, as well as the ability to call that sub-process. So I called a sub-process to allow creating of that document and updating of that document. And then we've also got that merge. Remember, our 3 users had to complete the task before we actually moved on to the next step. So here's a little merge area. So now I can specify, do I want to wait for all 3 users to approve or action the task, or do I just want to wait for the system comments or the quality person? So again, I can specify which users I want to action the task before I continue on to the next step. So this is kind of that sending out parallel tasks and making sure they're all joined together before we continue on the next step. Sometimes this is kind of nice when you have things like even more complex, again, going into the business critical HR onboarding scenarios where I have tasks being sent out to IT. I've also got tasks being sent out to logistics and finance, and we want to wait for everyone to complete before we actually onboard that user. So again, being able to call sub-processes and being able to merge those together. So again, that's kind of that quick process, and we walked through that. The design experience itself is a drag and drop scenario, so I can just drag tasks onto the canvas. Again, if I wanted to send a user task in this case, I can send a task, and now I can go ahead and fill out my wizard for my user. If I want to actually do other things, so I can send user tasks that are SmartForms or a custom task, I can do that as well. If I want to manipulate the document, maybe create a document set as part of this, maybe it's a bigger business critical application that requires a document set and other documents to be created, I can do that within the wizards here as well. Active Directory and Exchange, so I can actually create Active Directory users. I can update users in Active Directory. And you might right away be thinking, wait, I don't want all my users to have that capability. You do have the ability to limit the wizards that are shown depending on which users they are. So you don't have to expose your Active Directory and Exchange wizards to everyone in your environment. You do have the ability to apply security around that. So users that shouldn't be creating Active Directory or Exchange accounts don't have that ability. Another question I usually get asked is, I'm going to allow my users to create workflows, but I want to make sure that they're properly created workflows. You can actually have a workflow underneath these workflows. So as a user submits the workflow and deploys it, so you can hit deploy, you can actually have a workflow that captures that deploy and sends a task to IT potentially to say, hey, a workflow's been submitted, make sure it's good, and approve it before it actually gets deployed into production. So you do have some things and conditions set into place that you can make sure these processes are getting created properly. And then we looked at our Word document to be able to create Word documents, convert these to PDFs, etc. So at the end of my process, one of the last steps I could do is convert it to a PDF, throw it into a document set, and it's now ready, or throw it into my records management system. Smart objects, if I want to actually update different line of business systems as part of this process, I can do that as well. And then I can even copy different sections. So if I want to copy this section that sends tasks to IT, I can copy that, paste it somewhere else, save it as a template. When it gets saved as a template, now you have access to that. So you have reusable components that you can reuse without having to recreate the entire step as well. So as an example of that, let's just go ahead and add a new step here and show you how that template works. So my change approval, which is this exact same entire process, I can drag it onto the canvas and it'll actually expand that all out. So I've got a new, totally built out step created for me. So I don't have to go recreate everything. So again, a lot of reusability. All right, so let me just kind of walk through one other example real quickly and just kind of talk about, we talked about workflow and we talked about simple forms, but let's talk about how we can extend things like this using even more robust forms like K2 SmartForms that allow you to tie in those line of business information. So as part of this, I'm just going to go quickly and enter a task here, and I'm just going to open up my shortcut for Chad real quickly. I'm going to submit an expense claim or a leave request for Chad, and I'm just going to use my quick shortcut, and it's actually going to open up a web page, and this web page is using K2 SmartForms to action or to create a request. So just quickly opening that up, and you can see this has got my logo on it. It's also got any leave requests I have outstanding, as well as the ability to create new leave requests. So this is actually retrieving information from my SharePoint library, or it could pull it from SQL, wherever you have your leave requests being stored. I can create a new leave request. And again, here's my smart form, retrieving employee details from Active Directory, and also having the ability to tie in using those rich controls my out of office or my leave request. So I'm going to go ahead and just submit some information here. My leave type, and again, this could be a hard-coded list. It can be pulled from Active Directory. It can be pulled from SharePoint, etc. And let's just put some jury duty. Let's type that value in. And I'm only going to be gone for 2 days. So we can submit that leave request for Chad. And again, underneath this is a process that K2 is picking up as part of that step. So my request has been submitted, and I can close my window down. Now if I look at my HR department in my SharePoint library, and again, it's using a combination of all the assets and features that SharePoint offers, and just exploiting those using K2's tooling and K2's pillars, if you will. So here's the first thing I see is my leave requests. So I've got a new leave request for Chad, and it got stored, and K2 pushed it into my SharePoint library. Again, I started with the K2 Smart Form, and now I'm integrating with SharePoint to retrieve that. So my end user doesn't even need to know that it's being used with SharePoint, but in the background, K2 is integrating everything with it. So, and that's really the way it should be. You should have your users use SharePoint as they need it, but don't put the complexity on them to know how to use, create document libraries and lists and update lists, etc. So if I look at my employee tracker, my leave balance, as part of my process, K2 is actually going to come in and make sure that the person has actual leave balance before it gets routed. So we can kind of take a look at that as well. So I'm going to go into my manager step here for Chad and just kind of show you that workflow. So I'm going to use my little shortcut here, and I believe it's William that's my user here. And again, this user as well, as we saw, you can create emails, send them email tasks, and send those off. And it looks like it might have gone to HR, so I can go ahead and open up my one of my HR users and make sure I can action my tasks out. So again, I'm going to open up Dennis. And so as we're looking through this, being able to action tasks and configure tasks is pretty important, but also being able to manage and maintain. And so it got routed to Dennis because he's in HR. Well, I have a number of users that are in Active Directory that are under the HR account. And so K2 actually action the tasks by searching for a group inside of Active Directory that said HR. So let's kind of take a look at that view flow real quickly. And again, just giving us the ability to take a look at that item. So we checked our balance, and we might have not had enough balance in our employee tracker, so we routed it accordingly, and now we can route it to the manager after it's gone to HR. So typically, sometimes you got to make sure it's got enough leave balance before we actually route it to the manager for approval. So HR was our first level of approval based on the number or the balance in their balance for jury duty. So do they have enough jury duty balance? In this case, they didn't have an item for that, so HR is now being actioned that task. So again, as we action the task, and I'm not going to do this one because again, it's just being able to action tasks using the forms, but just quickly to pull up that same form, I want to show you a little bit of the administrative functionality and what you get with K2 from an administrative, because it is that platform. It's more than just building workflows, it's more than just building forms, but you have a full platform that allows you to manage these tasks. So again, here's our smart form that allows us to action a task with the K2 information on it as well. So let me just kind of back up there and go into the administrative functionality. And I've got some process portals, and this really gives us the ability to administer our tasks and administer our server as well, being able to set versions on processes, which users have rights to processes. You see the number of processes that are running, and this is all within SharePoint as process portals, and they're just web parts inside of SharePoint. You can even see I've got a management work list for each process. I can see the tasks that have been delivered, who it's actually been delivered to, who my users are, and I additionally have the ability to go in and maybe redirect or route this task to a different user, so I can route it by redirecting or delegate it to another user so someone else can look at it as well. So another good question is view flow a K2 function or a SharePoint function? So the view flow is a K2 function. So everything that I'm showing you right now is all the K2 functionality, from the view flow to these process portals to the K2 SmartForm. It's all within K2, and it's really just leveraging that SharePoint environment as a portal and a collaboration environment. So K2 is integrating with the lists and document libraries, adding web parts so that we can actually collaborate within the environment. But yes, the view flow is a K2 function, so allowing you to have that visibility, as well as the ability to see other process information. So if I want to look at all my process instances, I saw that individual instance, now maybe I want to look at something else, so I can go hit OK here, and I want to see all my change requests that I've got created. So that list gave me the ability to choose which process I want to really start drilling into. And now this is some of the data that K2 is capturing for every process that I've ever submitted within this particular change request. So you can see I've got all my change requests. This is one of those out-of-the-box tools. I can go in, take a look at that view flow. Again, the K2 view flow that gives me the picture of that process, so I can see what path this particular process took. And I also have the ability to drill into each one of those individual items. So I can go see, well, I want to look at this change request that was submitted for compatibility upgrade. And now I can see all the steps that took place and all the data that was captured from. So again, I can see who actually was delivered the task. So my IT head, I can go in and take a look at that as well and see information relative to who the users are that were actioning tasks, etc. And so additional to this is, again, these out-of-the-box web parts that show you information, but all this information is accessible via those smart objects. So those smart objects really give you access to the data And now in this data, you can build things like custom dashboards. You can open that inside of SQL reporting services. You can open it inside of Excel Power Pivot and make some really dynamic dashboards and expose those into SharePoint. So you have a lot of capability with the reporting as well and some of the data being captured by K2. All right, so I've got about 9 or 7 minutes, looks like 7 minutes left in my webinar today, so I want to make sure I give you some contact information. And again, if you have any questions, I do see that a couple of people have written in, and I appreciate those. If you've liked what you've seen, if you didn't like what you've seen, please feel free to email us. We'd be happy to have a discussion with you or create some content that's useful for you to see. So here's our contact information. If you want to check out any of those case studies or our customer accounts or customer stories, you can definitely go to our website and check those out. K2 TV allows you to see some other examples of processes that have been built with K2, as well as our events, weekly online webinars, in-person events, depending on your location. And if you like K2 and you like what you saw and you want to check it out and try it for yourself, you can go to our website and click on the Try Now link.